Good morning, everyone. We are so pleased to be invited to be part of the World of Talent 2021 convening an international conference on talent development and honors education. My name is Leo Lambert, and I'm President Emeritus of Elon University and Professor of Education here. And I'd like now to ask my fellow distinguished panelists to introduce themselves. And I'd like to begin with Dr. Peter Felten.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Felten. I'm a professor of history. I'm executive director of the Center for Engaged Learning and assistant provost for teaching and learning here at Elon. I've been involved in international education initiatives for a number of years. I was president of the International Society for the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, and I'm co-editor of the International Journal for Academic Development. Why I'm here really for this session is Leo and I co-authored a book from Hopkins University Press, published last November, called Relationship-Rich Education: How Human Connections Drive Success in College. We'll be talking more about that book as we go. Thanks for having me. Maureen?
Good morning, everyone, especially to my Dutch colleagues out there. My name is Maureen Vandermaas-Peeler. I'm a professor of psychology at Elon University. I just finished my 26th year here. And among the things I've done, I directed our honors program for 5 years. And I became very interested at that time in academic mentoring. So I'll talk a little bit more about that today. And an initiative that I'm leading at Elon with the American Council on Education's Learner Success Lab. Elon's focus will be mentoring for learner success. So we'll talk about that. John?
I'm John Zubizarreta, and I wanted to share with you that I have my Dutch coffee cup with me this morning. I have interacted with all of my Dutch colleagues quite a number of times, so I may know some of you quite well. But I am now Emeritus Professor of English and Director of Honors at Columbia College. I just retired, and I'm delighted to be here. I have a directed honors program at Columbia College for more than 30 years. And I'm a member of the National Collegiate Honors Council. I'm a past president of the organization. And I still have very close ties with NCHC. I'm the chair of the Teaching and Learning Committee. And I think I'll turn it back over to Dr. Lambert.
Thank you, John. And John, what an icon you've been for honors education throughout the world, and Case Professor of the Year for the entire state of South Carolina. Thank you for everything that you've done over the course of your distinguished career to advance honors education globally. You've been amazing. So today, the four of us want to talk about what we might think of as three intersecting circles in a Venn diagram. One of those we'll call honors education. The second, the importance of relationship-rich cultures on our campuses to help ensure the success of all students. And then thirdly, the importance of deep mentoring experiences for students, particularly in the context of honors education. So originally, I was going to deliver this talk to you in person in the summer of 2019, but the global pandemic had different ideas. And so speaking as a former university president with a nearly 20-year tenure in that role, one of my headline messages to you was to be that investing in honors education is good for every student at the university, not just those enrolled in honors programs. And that's still my message today. From my experience, building and strengthening our honors program was a critical part of a much larger agenda to achieve higher levels of academic excellence at our institution. So investing in honors education, I want to emphasize, is catalytic. Let me give you a couple of examples. Thriving alongside honors at Elon is a very strong undergraduate research program involving hundreds and hundreds of students. And of course, all of our honors students do undergraduate research and a thesis, but their pioneering has bolstered a much larger enterprise on our campus. Another example would be that we created an Office of National and International Fellowships to encourage our students to compete for postgraduate awards like Truman Scholarships. And we located that office right next door to our honors headquarters. Today, Elon is one of the largest producers of Fulbright scholars in the United States and also a leading producer of Peace Corps volunteers, another catalytic effect of a strong honors program. And all of these efforts and many more, I think, contributed to Elon receiving a chapter of Phi Beta Kappa in 2010, which is the oldest and most prestigious honorary society in the United States. I think a mark of excellence that shines on the entire institution. Honors played a big role in that. So to begin with, I think we all need to, throughout this session, shift our mindset from thinking about honors as impacting only this small elite core of students, when in fact, investing in honors education is a key element of talent development overall. So Peter, I want to switch to you. Speaking of wider impact, an honors program with strong mentoring is probably the first example that comes to mind when we think about relationship-rich culture on a university campus. But you and I, throughout our work on our book, think about relationship education much more broadly. Could you introduce our book and say a word about why we wrote it and the 4 principles that undergird the book's contents?
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Leo. And as you said, honors education is really a model, an exemplar of what good relationship-rich education for undergraduates can look like in many different contexts. Our book on relationship-rich education really came out of what we saw as a fundamental disconnect between the research that says very, very clearly, decades of research that says the most significant contributor to positive student outcomes, all sorts of outcomes, learning, motivation, identity development, graduation rates, civic engagement, all of those are most closely tied to the quality of relationships undergraduates have with faculty, with staff, and with their peers. And so the research is so clear that these relationships matter so much. But when we look around our campuses and our own campus, we look around education in the United States, often we look around the world, what we see is a gap between the practice and that research. We see that most academic programs, most academic courses, most universities are not designed as if the quality of relationships was the most important thing for student outcomes. And so what you and I tried to do in this book is not recreate all that research and redo that research, but instead we used almost 400 interviews with students and faculty and staff at more than 24 institutions around the US to look at exemplars and stories of what relationship-rich education looks like in practice, how it's possible in lots of different contexts, and why it matters so much for our students and for our institutions. Especially in the US, we're talking more and more about new majority students, students of color, first generation college students, students over the age of 24, who now are the majority of undergraduates in the US and will be far into the future. And so drawing on those 400 interviews, we came up with 4 principles that emerged from those that I just want to outline really quickly, thinking about what are the characteristics of relationship-rich education. First is that relationship-rich education is founded in a sense of welcome and care for all students. Students need to have this sense that they belong academically, that they belong personally at this institution in this program of study. Right. And that welcome and care in the US, at least, often is conveyed just at the beginning of a student's time at the institution. You know, there's an orientation right when you begin the honors program or right when you begin as a first year, and then that's it. And what students really need is this sense of welcome and care to be what someone we interviewed called relentless throughout their time as an undergraduate. So they continue to feel welcome and cared for as they struggle, as they persist, as they grow. So that's principle 1. Principle 2 is that relationships are the most important way to inspire student learning, to motivate students to learn. What we heard from students over and over is how a faculty member's passion got them interested in something that they thought they didn't care about at all. or how connections and working alongside peers or working on a thesis or working in an internship or in a community setting really help them see themselves and the world and their learning in fundamentally new ways. And so these relationships, these human connections really inspire and drive learning. A third principle that seems very, very relevant, especially in honors education, talent development, is that what students need is not a single mentor who does everything for them. What they need is a web of significant relationships. What our friend and colleague and scholar Brad Johnson from the Naval Academy calls a constellation of mentors. Different people who can do different things to support and to challenge that student. And as a historian, I could help a student think about how they read and how they write, how they ask questions in certain ways, but I'm not the right person to mentor them into how to get into graduate school in physics, or to think about their identity as an emerging Black woman, for example, right? And so there's different people who can do different things for students. So what we need to do is help our students develop these webs of relationships. And finally, our fourth principle is that higher education really needs to be something that challenges students to think about big questions in their lives. Who are they? Who are they becoming? What do they have to offer the world? And that students can do that kind of reflective learning, that kind of deep thinking on their own. But the research is quite clear that they're more likely to do it, and they're more likely to persist through struggling and really hard questions if they're doing it along with others, often who see potential in them, who see talent in them, who see capacity in them that they may not recognize themselves. So those are the four principles that come out of the book that undergird perhaps where we're going today.
Peter, could you just say a word about the importance of classrooms and engaged pedagogies to that second principle of inspiring students to learn?
Yeah, thanks, Leo. Because one of the things that sometimes faculty in the US will think is, this is great, but this is not me. This is all those other people on campus. And the research is very clear, in our interviews with students over and over showed that the classroom is the single most important place for students to develop meaningful relationships with peers and with faculty in particular. In fact, we did a poll, Leo and I, with our colleagues at the Elon University poll. We polled 4,000 recent college graduates in the United States. And we asked them a number of questions about the kinds of relationships they developed in college. And one of the things that was really striking is how significant the classroom was. Almost everybody said their most important relationship with a peer and with a faculty member emerged in the classroom first. So classrooms are central. If our classrooms aren't relationship rich, the student experience won't be relationship rich.
Thank you, Peter. That was wonderful. Thanks for getting us started. So John, as a segue to you, I think one of the most important quotes in our book is yours. It's your voice. And let me read this. And you're talking about institutional culture here and the importance of institutional culture in fostering an environment of relationships and mentoring. Here's John. An institution needs to commit, I mean whole hog commit, to the importance of mentoring as an institutional cultural priority. If that becomes a part of the real lived mission of the institution, then that institution is going to make mentoring a priority in the type of faculty it hires, not just hiring willy-nilly because this candidate had 10 books and went to an elite university. Our priority is to hire faculty who care and to put teaching at least equal to their other priorities, scholarship and service. But mentoring needs to be a priority institutionally. Otherwise, you're going to be struggling to find the kind of faculty who are going to invest in the type of mentoring that we are talking about. Such wise words. It's one of the best quotes in the book. How does an institution, in your experience, foster a culture of mentoring and talent development, John?
Well, you know, when you had asked me that question in preparing the book, I was thinking about how my role at Columbia College as both the director of the honors program and the director of faculty development was, for me, it was a godsend, because both of those roles, both of those responsibilities played into my twin passions for working with motivated students and working with motivated faculty as well. So it was like a dream career for me, for those two things to fall under my wings. And so I was thinking about how in honors, for example, you have a kind of a built-in mechanism for creating a culture with the students particularly, and with the faculty who teach those courses, because it's a smaller segment of the entire institution. So it's a little bit easier, I think, to have an impact, to make a difference with the people that are in the program, students and faculty. And I think it's really all comes down to a matter of trust, I think, mentoring, and building those kinds of relationships that depend on trust. And in order to build that kind of trust, which then becomes part of the culture, you have to have regular contact with the people that you're working with or for. You have to make a long-term commitment. It's not just a 15-minute advising session to talk about what courses you take in next semester. And so honors, I think, is a perfect opportunity to develop those kinds of strategies, those kinds of skills. And it's more than skills even. These are habits of learning, habits of being. And I think that honors is just a perfect place for that to happen. But more to the point of your question, how to develop that kind of culture, faculty development, I think, is crucial. And it's not just my bias, because I was director of faculty development for almost 30 years. It's not just because of that, but faculty development is a way of identifying and working with faculty who care, who have those interests, those passions for working closely, long-term, making those long-term commitments of trust and help with students. And you know what? Faculty development, though, is something that typically happens once the faculty are on campus. Then you begin working with them, to develop their skills and their talents and their interests and so forth. But really, to develop this culture that we're talking about, it has to start before they even get to campus. In other words, it has to start at the recruitment phase. And you have to start looking for faculty. You have to develop ways of identifying faculty who do believe in the value of mentoring. Not just sitting down with students in the classroom or in their office to have advising sessions. Advising is really just a very small part of mentoring. And many faculty are very good advisors, and they're very good teachers, but they're not necessarily the best mentors, maybe only because they just maybe don't want to be that kind of a faculty member. And that's okay. That's another thing that I've learned over the years is, faculty members are good in very different ways, and you have to respect that and allow that room for faculty interests. So I think, though, to identify, before they even set foot on campus, identify those faculty who really believe in what we're talking about in this session, the value, the power of relationships. And advising, again, is only a small part. And, it's advising and even teaching in the classroom, they're pretty small parts of our overall responsibility. I tend to think of my investment in teaching and learning and even scholarship as a calling, not just a job. And just very, very quickly, I will tell you why. And it goes to the heart of your book. When I was an undergraduate student at a community college, I had a teacher, an English teacher, who truly, through relationships, changed my life forever. She took me in under her wing as a teacher, but also as a friend and as a mother even though I love my mother, and I had great parents at the time. Dr. Buer, Marjorie Buer, became a kind of a second mother to me. And she nurtured me, she taught me, and she took me into her home even. And I spent many nights there in her spare bedroom. And we'd wake up in the morning and she'd play her opera full blast, and we'd talk about Wallace Stevens and other literary figures. But when it was time for me to go to graduate, finally, from the community college, I thought I was done. And she said, no, you have to keep going. So she collaborated with the dean of the college and got me a little scholarship so that I could finish my 2 years of senior college. And then I truly thought I was done at that point. I mean, I had a bachelor's degree. What else could you want? And she said, no, you have to go to graduate school and you have to become a teacher. And so at the same time, her son, who was exactly my age, was killed in a motorcycle accident. And she was, of course, as you can imagine, devastated. And she used some of the insurance money that her family collected to send me to grad school. So that's relationship, rich education. That's the kind of mentoring relationship that changes lives. And so that's why I've always thought that it was crucial. It was more than important. It was lifeblood for me to have those kinds of relationships with my students. And so you have to identify faculty who have those stories and who have those interests before you even hire them. And that's how you create a culture, right? And that's how you identify faculty who can help you sustain that kind of culture. So
John, that's it.
I think that that's how you build a culture from the get-go, not just after faculty and students are on campus, but before. And this, by the way, I think the same goes for students.
It's an amazing story, a touching story. And you talk about a personal investment in someone else's life. Oh my goodness. One of the issues, though, is that at many universities in the United States, mentoring is not valued as a part of the faculty reward system for promotion and tenure and salary increases. And despite this, we know that many faculty do it anyway, because like you, they were mentored by someone and they want to pay it forward for undergraduates today. But we have this big disconnect between what we value and what we reward on many university campuses in the United States. And I know we have some deans in the audience this morning listening. So what can institutional leaders do to address this disconnect?
Well, Peter, like many others in faculty development, has been working with faculty and leaders from the presidents on down for many years. And he probably can help me out on this question. But, I think it's important for leaders, department chairs, deans, provosts, presidents, to set the tone, right? They have to step up and make the commitments. Just like I was saying, faculty need to make these long-term commitments in order to build that kind of trust that results in these relationship-rich cultures. And I think that leaders have to step up and be the very models themselves of what we're talking about here. And the president, with apologies, Leo, the president who just sits in his office all day long and makes phone calls to raise money, okay, fine, that's important, and that's important for the institution. But I think it doesn't result necessarily in building those kinds of trust-based relationships with faculty, with students. One of the things that most impressed me You bragged on me a little bit when we were doing introductions, Leo. I'll brag on you. One of the things that impressed me the most when I was invited to come to Elon and help, review their honors program, which is one of the best in the country, by the way. I was impressed that when I spoke to you during that review, that you insisted that the honors program office be in the same building right down the hall from your office so that you could interact with those students on a daily basis and with the faculty. There are very many leaders, very many presidents who do that. Often they're sequestered in their little office somewhere, but I think that leaders need to step up and actually model what we're talking about here.
Sometimes, John, those were the only moments of joy in my day, was interacting with those honor students.
Yeah.
Peter, you want to say a word about the faculty development angle here? Because I think that's so critical.
Yeah, just really briefly, and I agree with everything John said. I think it's so important that leaders model and shape culture in those ways. I think also leaders and all of us need to attend to what the reward structures are and what the systems of support are. So in our interviews for the book, Leo and I talked to a troubling number of faculty who said they would mentor students despite the fact that it did them no professional good, right? That it never came up in the annual reviews they did. When they would go for promotion or tenure, it was not a consideration at all. And we also spoke to colleagues who said that their institution had a very narrow definition of what good mentoring would be. And so one of the places I was privileged to interview, I won't name the school, but they have an amazing program that takes students between their first and second year as undergraduates and immerses them in undergraduate research in high-end research labs, mostly in the sciences. And what the faculty in this program said is that's very powerful. And that was seen as a success by the dean when those students went on to graduate school in genetics, in biology, in whatever. But if a student had that experience and then went to graduate school in psychology or English, or went and picked up some other avocation, that was seen as a failure of the program. And these faculty were saying, but when we get to know these students and when they get immersed in the lab and in the research experience, some of them discover this isn't what they expected. This isn't their passion, right? So I really think we have to have that kind of symbolic leadership and culture shaping leadership. And then we have to look at the structures and supports and say, do they align so that faculty who are doing the good work of mentoring are able to report on and be rewarded for that good work, and faculty who are doing the complex work of mentoring, which means sometimes guiding students on that straight line towards a Nobel Prize and sometimes helping them maneuver through a number of twists and turns, can also be recognized for doing good work.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. So Maureen, you directed Elon's honors program for many years and took it to new heights during your tenure as a leader. And as you reflect back on that experience and your own background as a psychologist, what are your key pieces of advice to our international colleagues about fostering a strong culture of mentoring in an honors context?
Thank you, Leo. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm actually standing in the suite that you've been hearing about. My office is here as well. So we have honors, undergraduate research is right next door, the fellowships office, and I direct a Center for Research on Global Engagement that I forgot to mention earlier. So we are right down the hall from our new president. And we do, in fact, interact, especially when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. We all miss those daily interactions. So in your book, Leo and Peter, you referred to, I think, sort of mentor of the moment. I would say, though, that those conversations are really important, and we're able to have them with students because we're here. So space matters. And I think Leo, his vision on that was really great for Elon's campus. So I'll just say a couple of words about the structure of the program and where I see that offering opportunities for mentoring. And John, you said it about faculty before they come. We do, I think, interview people talking about their mentoring experiences, but for our students, they apply to be in honors before they get here. So during the admission process. And so we invite them to a big weekend that both Leo and Peter have been involved in, which is to kind of showcase the programs and the university campus as a whole. So I think it's important to keep this idea that we integrate students. So they do have some special coursework when they get here, but they hear about mentoring from students who have mentors, who love them, who interact. They hear from alumni how it really mattered for their careers. So before they even get to campus, we want to set the culture that you will come and you will have a mentor. And I think we can do better about that, but I think we are very intentional. So I really appreciated your point there, John, about, let's think before we come to campus. So there are specially designed courses in their first couple of years. And these, as Peter highlighted, the classroom is so important. So these are great opportunities to connect deeply with faculty. They're small classes and they're specially designed just for this purpose. And so faculty invest quite a lot of time and they are delighted to interact with students in their first and second year. And of course, the honors thesis is in the last 2 years. And that's the time where we know there's going to be a deep mentoring relationship. And I want to highlight that this is part of our identity at Elon. We are teacher, scholar, mentors. That's how we have adopted our identity. And so we live that. And so our students mentoring for us is very much a part of our work. It's connected to my scholarship always. It's connected to my teaching. So we thread this. It's connected to service. Before I directed the program, I was on the committee. I, gave Mary Jo Festel, the director then, lots of feedback. And so I almost inadvertently set myself up to become the next director by being so engaged and involved. So what advice, sorry to take so long. Oh, and co-curricular. So we have a residential campus that is thriving. And so our students have peer mentors, staff mentors, faculty mentors, this constellation. So the advice I would say is develop a culture early in the program. Don't wait until the students settle into a major and do research. I think early. And one of the things I'm learning, and the advice I'm giving you today is partly born out of some interviews that I've been doing. I've interviewed about 60 students on our campus, many of them in the honors program, in the last 6 weeks. And I'm also talking to faculty and staff mentors as part of a project that I'll talk about next. And in this work, the voices are very clearly saying we need multiple opportunities. We don't just assume that my research mentor is going to be the be-all relationship. It will hopefully be that, but you need multiple opportunities and you need them early. You need to get comfortable talking to faculty. So one of my second pieces of advice besides, start early is that we need to have open and informed communication between faculty, staff, students. Students over and over are saying to me, I'm scared to talk to faculty. I don't know how to do it, especially when they come from historically underrepresented identities. They may not have had this kind of opportunity before. And so helping students be comfortable talking to faculty in particular is really important. So we have to develop that early. And then for mentors to help them come across as real people. I talk to people who use music and they use food and they use, just lots of ways to say, I'm just another person too. So, and then I think research is a great way though to develop a relationship. It starts very instrumental, often kind of goal focused, but it becomes this rich personal connection over time. So Leo invited Caroline Dean and me to one of his classes to talk about mentoring. And we just had a ball. We just loved it. Let's talk about how our relationship developed. And she highlighted something really important for students that I want to lift up here too, which is you have to embrace failure. As a campus, you have to celebrate failure, which sounds strange, I know, but students need to understand not every relationship is going to work. You might have a peer mentor that you just don't click with. You were assigned and it just didn't work necessarily. So celebrate the failure and make it part of the culture. And I think that's an important piece. And then lastly, I just want to say again, pay special attention to students. Peter called them the new majority students who come from historically underrepresented identities on our campuses. Elon is a primarily white institution. So looking in particular, what do students of color need? What do first generation students whose parents didn't go to college, what do they need? So, I talked to one student at Elon who wanted so badly to have a faculty mentor with a shared identity, and it just didn't work out in her major. But she was able to find a staff mentor she could talk to about being here, being someone who identified as Black and low income. And that was a very important relationship for her. So again, thinking about a constellation of mentors and multiple opportunities for that with some attention to cultural mentor matching. So I could keep going, Leo, but I'll pause and see if you want me to talk a little bit about the next project.
Yeah, so you've been involved in the American Council on Education, an important national organization in the US, their Learner Success Lab project, and you've been thinking about ways to highlight mentoring on campus, in the curriculum, in the co-curriculum, in student employment, and in community engagement. How do you tell us about that work and what you are doing to think about mentoring and talent development, if you will, as a ubiquitous activity on campus?
Thanks. And I'll invite my colleagues to join. Normally, we'd probably be doing a little bit more talking back and forth, so please jump in if you have questions. So in March of 2020, around the world, and especially here at our institution, we went home because of the pandemic. And at the same time, the Learner Success Lab was advertised by American Council on Education. We'll call it ACE. And they gave us an opportunity for a 12 to 18-month self-study looking at how learner success materializes on a campus. And I wrote an application to be part of the inaugural cohort, really saying, I want to focus on mentoring for learner success. So it's given us a really great window of opportunity to take a look at where is mentoring working well on Elon's campus and where are the gaps and what do we need to pay attention to. And this aligns with our strategic plan called Boldly Elon. And I'll just read you the sentence that highlights what Leo was saying about a ubiquitous model. So that we want to foster all students' agency to develop meaningful mentoring relationships in what we are calling a constellation of mentors. And I can tell you that students love this idea of a constellation. It's fairly new to them. But when I talk about it in my interviews with them, they get delighted. Somebody started talking about his North Star and galaxies, and we can go far with this metaphor. But agency is a key word here, Leo. We are not going to be building constellations for students. They have got to figure out how to do it. And it can come back to their identities. Again, maybe as a psychologist, I pay particular attention to this, but students are arriving on our campus with different identities, different personalities, different experiences. And so we're going to have to start early to help them develop agency. So that's certainly a work in progress. We're collecting all kinds of data through surveys and existing data that we already have. We're certainly looking at your book as a great source of inspiration for this project. So it's a work in progress. So I just thought I'd mention a few points. One is that to build a culture of mentoring, as John talked about, you have to take what I would call an ecological model, an ecology of support. And I love that because as a developmental psychologist, it's not just about the systems and their place on campus, but it's the interactions across these systems. And they have direct and indirect influences on learning and culture. I think a lot about global engagement as a great opportunity for students. Is it, a way that we can connect mentoring? I think about this a lot. Leo and I made a trip to Istanbul together to try to infuse a global engagement experience for honor students in their very first year, in winter term. They go and they become engaged. So again, the culture of mentoring needs multiple systems of support, time and resources and space. Mentoring is hard work and it takes a long time. And it is not something that just develops quickly. So the ecology has to be very supportive. And I think, Leo's leadership on our campus was instrumental there. So I have just a couple more things I would say. One is that you should define mentoring. John raised a really important point. Is it advising? It could be, but not necessarily, right? And Brad Johnson, who was mentioned earlier, has done a lot of work in this area, but we are working to define mentoring for our campus. And it is hard work. There is not a universal definition, and context matters and your role at the institution matters. So this is work in progress. And I would suggest for all of you listening today that you undertake that first. What does it mean on your campus? You need an institutional approach, I think, is really important. I said this earlier, but building multiple pathways, peer mentoring opportunities, staff mentoring opportunities, and especially faculty, and helping students know how to talk to faculty about their passions, their interests, and developing these connections. And then I want to highlight again that these constellations need to be diverse and dynamic. Mentoring changes over time. Students need different things at different points in their years. I think alumni connections are a really important point that we haven't really talked a lot about today. Alumni are really eager to mentor students. It needs a little bit of structure around it. There's this constant tension between a structured formal program and organic let it develop in mentoring. That's just a constant tension. And I would suggest that our research is showing us that you need some sort of structures, but you have to allow for organic mentoring over time. You're nodding, Peter. Did you want to jump in there?
I think it's both and. It's,
Yep.
Right. It's both
Yep.
and. So I would just go for it, Maureen.
Structures within a very supportive culture for this work. Peter, I want to wrap up by getting back to you. Maureen mentioned the growing number of new majority students in the United States, including here at Elon, people of color, first generation college students. Many of those students have traditionally not been included in honors programs on many campuses. And yet we visited Rutgers University, Newark, and saw their honors college model and their honors living learning community model, which focuses on social change in the city of Newark. Say a bit more about how honors can be more inclusive to people of color and other new majority students.
Sure. Thanks for asking this, Leo, because I think it's so important. One bit of context for everybody from outside the US who might not know Rutgers University, Newark. It's in New Jersey. It's a research university. It's often classified the most ethnically and racially diverse research university in the United States. There's about 13,000 students at Rutgers, Newark. And as Leo said, there's both a fairly traditional honors college, which is interdisciplinary, very strongly undergraduate research focused with a year-long thesis requirement for students. And since 2015, Rutgers Newark has also had this honors living learning community, which is 400 students who are, well, let me use their words. The honors living learning community seeks to reconsider the notions of talent, excellence, and merit in higher education. So it takes an assets, a strengths-based approach to selecting students and supporting students. They do in-person interviews, group simulations in admissions, because as John was saying, how you start is so important. Mm-hmm. And what they're looking for in this both is to select and also to help students to feel welcome into the program, because often what they're aiming for is in a program that's almost entirely new majority students. So their primary admissions criteria are demonstrated resilience and tenacity and potential for contribution and engagement in the community. It's not test scores first. You have to be eligible to be admitted to Rutgers Newark. But beyond that, test scores, grades are not essential. And so it's really interesting for them to rethink both the practices and assumptions of what talent development looks like. So they would ask, for example, what is the best evidence that would demonstrate a student has the kinds of persistence and resilience necessary to do high quality academic work? In many US honors programs, the answer to that is high test scores, high grades in high school. Although, for example, in the US, admissions test scores are most closely correlated with family income, not success in college, not success in university. And so what Rutgers Newark is trying to say is, what does a 30-year-old parent honors applicant look like? You're not going to go back to that person's high school grades. You may not go to their test scores. You might say, what have they done in their community? What have they done in their work to be successful? Or if you're balancing two traditional aged undergraduate applicants, what if you weigh the student who worked 20 hours a week at McDonald's for 3 years in high school and give the student credit for becoming an assistant manager at McDonald's through that work and paying many of the bills of their family in the same way, or perhaps even more than you would a student who didn't work at all for pay during college, but has a long list, or during high school, but has a long list of extracurricular activities. So really it's about thinking about what is the potential for talent in all of these students, in all of our applicants, rather than what is this narrow band of talent that too often in the US, at least, we look at as the only markers for qualifying someone for honors education.
Peter, I think that is a hopeful and forward-thinking way to end our session this morning. We are out of time, but I want to thank this distinguished panel of scholars and friends for being with us today. We salute you across the pond and wish you a wonderful conference in the Netherlands. Wish we could be there to join you in person and hope we'll have that opportunity someday soon. We'll say goodbye.
Bye, thank you.
I want to say something really more about Elon than myself, because I think our institutional context and our US context is really important to put on the table here to maybe further the understanding of everybody around the world. It will, I think, will help with our conversation. So there are 4,000 colleges and universities in the United States, a lot of institutions of higher education. And Americans love to rank things. And so we have rankings of our universities, right? And one of the most famous and influential is the US News and World Report rankings. So very recently, within the last few years, Elon has been ranked among the top 100 universities in the US. And it's a very good group of institutions to be included among. You've heard of these schools: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, the University of Chicago, places like this. We're the new kids on the block, as we say in the United States, in this group of schools. How did we get there? Most of those top 100 institutions in the US built their reputations over hundreds of years on research. They are institutions that have had research as their fundamental mission. Elon comes to this group with a very different background and a very different mission. Our mission from our outset has been about excellence in teaching and student development. This is what we've been passionate about, and this is what we have been committed about for decades. If you were to ask in the United States, what's Elon known for? People would say that is a school that is committed to active and engaged and experiential learning. Those same US News and World Report rankings give Elon the #2 ranking in the country for undergraduate teaching. Princeton is #1. That same set of US News and World Report rankings asks who's doing the best work in experiential learning. And they're looking in 8 different areas: study abroad, undergraduate research, civic engagement, writing across the curriculum, first-year experiences, senior capstone experiences, internships, and residential learning communities. And our institution is the only institution in the nation that's listed as an exemplar in all 8 categories. So my point is, this is our mission. This is what we have devoted ourselves to, not just for a few years, but for 4 decades. And I guess if there's one metaphor I'd want to use early on with the audience is, this is not microwave cooking work, right? This is slow cooker work. This is something that, this is culture building, mission building work that we are talking about here today. I want to make 3 other quick points about context. One of which is higher education in the US is very expensive. It costs more than $50,000 a year to go to Elon. You can buy a house in the US in many parts of the country for what one invests in a university education here. And I will tell you that our students and parents are expecting a highly relationship-rich environment. They want their students, parents want to see their students develop important relationships with faculty and staff. But I think there are other 2 very other important trends to highlight, one of which was mentioned in the video, and that is that we have in the United States a very, very rapidly changing student body. This image of an undergraduate student being 18 to 22 years old, carefree, white, male, affluent, that is a vision, that is an image, I should say, from the 19th and early 20th century. Today in the United States, college students are most likely to be women, part-time, students of color, first-generation college students, immigrants to the United States, what we call a rising new American majority. And relationships are going to be essential to help these new students who are coming to university be successful. And the other contextual factor that I wanted to mention very quickly, just by way of introduction, is that we're also experiencing in this country pretty rapidly rising levels of challenges to student mental health, rising levels of stress and anxiety among our college students. And relationships, I think, are central to dealing with this emerging serious problem on university campuses. So rather than say more about myself, I just wanted to sort of give you a few tidbits about Elon, our mission, and a little bit of information about the U.S. context. So Peter and I wrote a book published by the Johns Hopkins University Press. You're holding it up. Thank you very much. And there are four major principles, I think, that undergird this work. And we distilled these principles from 400 or so interviews with students, faculty, and staff. We had these long form interviews. They were transcribed, and we looked at that data very carefully to help us understand what all of these interviewees from institutions across the United States were telling us about relationship-rich education and the importance of relationships in college. The first of those principles is that all students must experience genuine welcome and deep care. Not just welcome during orientation, but students have to feel like they belong on our campuses and that they matter. The second principle is that relationships are a powerful means to inspire all students to learn. Not just some students, but all students. That inspiration that students get when they're in the classroom and they are turned on, so to speak, by a passionate professor who loves their subject, it changes that student's conception of who they are and their place in the world and the gifts they have and what they can contribute. Our students come to university, I think, in part to find inspiration, and relationship-rich cultures and relationship-rich classrooms can provide that. The third principle of our book is that students need to develop webs of mentoring relationships. I think we come to undergraduate education sometimes with the same model that we have for graduate school, which is you're going to have one research professor, one mentor, somebody who's going to guide you through your PhD program, that one person that is so essential to you finishing your graduate program. That's much less true at the undergraduate level. We want our students to have multiple mentors, to have many significant relationships on campus. We want them to have what Peter and I call in our book, many mentors of the moment, people that you might have a 10-minute conversation with on a campus, but that 10-minute conversation with someone turns out to be one of the most important 10 minutes of your university education. We want that kind of activity to happen frequently for students. And then our last principle is that all students need meaningful relationships to help them and challenge them to explore the big questions of their lives. I think college oftentimes, or university, gets reduced to, we end up talking about it in terms of mere transactions or hurdles that need to be cleared. That's not why students come to university. They come to university to ask the big questions. Who am I? And what gifts and talents do I have? And what do I have to offer the world to make the world a better place? Those are important questions for students to encounter while they're in college. And Peter and I argue in our book that those big questions are best answered when you are in deep relationship with important mentors in your lives?
Thank you very much. I see some questions in the Q&A, and one question could be maybe answered also by Peter. And Peter, maybe you can also introduce yourself. But you mentioned several times the importance of a relationship-rich classroom and experience. So could you share some examples or maybe personal experiences on how to make classroom relationships rich?
Sure. Thank you, Marka. Thanks, everyone, for having me. My name is Peter Felten. I'm a history professor here at Elon, and I've been involved in academic development work with our teaching center and the Center for Engaged Learning for many years. So I have something of a sort of academic development, faculty development lens on this too. I want to, before I start to answer that question, I just want to underscore one thing Leo said, which is our book and the research for our book is really rooted in a US context, and we know that. And we're not in any way trying to say the US context is a universal context. What it means to be a student or to be a faculty member, an administrator, in Holland is going to be different than in Singapore, than it's different in the US. So what we're doing is sort of gently offering our examples and inviting you to think about what does and doesn't work in your context, but not to say this is how everyone is or how everyone should be. Now, really, really good question about how to make the classroom relationship rich, because as Leo said, at least in the US context, the classroom is the single most important place for students to experience meaningful relationships. That's the one place we have students. That's one place all students are. So one distinction we make in the book that I think is really helpful for us to think about as we begin is faculty-student relationships and student-student relationships. And the classroom can be a space for both of those kinds of things. The research in the US says one of the most powerful things faculty can do to build strong relationships with students in the classroom is to use student names, or at least attempt to use student names. So the research is fascinating that, at Elon, we have relatively small classes and getting to know students and calling them by name is powerful. But there's some studies at very large US universities where classes have hundreds of students. And the faculty simply asking students, what's your name when they interact, and then trying to use that student's name actually increases students' sense of belonging, makes students more likely to do homework and more likely to ask for help. So simple techniques from faculty, like using names, can be very powerful. And then the key to relationship-rich classrooms really is peer interactions. And so how do we, in our course design, how do we, in our pedagogy, support meaningful student interactions in class? And that tends to be about frequent interactions among small groups of peers, purposeful interactions. So it's not just wasting time or things like this, but students see there's a real value in doing this, and challenging interactions. And the research on structured peer work is really powerful and actually quite humbling. There's a large study in the US that demonstrated that actually traditional lecturing in face-to-face classes was less effective than highly structured online active learning courses. And a lot of faculty don't like that in the US because we'd like to think being in the room with us is the key. And what's really important, the research says, is students being with each other and wrestling with big questions, whether it's physics problems or issues in history and how do I make sense of some moment in history. So I would say key things there is structured active learning, and then faculty techniques as relatively simple as trying to use names and trying to be welcoming.
Well, thank you very much. There are some questions about the culture of Elon, and especially because Leo, you shared the high ranking now of Elon, but we also know that that was not the case some time ago. So you really did a great job. It said it's also thanks to your leadership. And one of the questions is from Peter. and he is saying, has there been a specific moment in time Elon decided to start building a new relationship building culture? So did you have a moment in time that you thought, okay, now we have to change things? And I think that maybe you also, used honors in this process and honors education. Could you elaborate on this question, please?
It's a great question. Elon is a relatively young institution by U.S. standards. We were founded in 1889. And so we are not one of these institutions like Harvard that was founded in the 1600s. But I would say even from the outset, we've had a long history of being an institution that has cared very deeply about students and quality teaching. I think that's been a part of our institutional DNA almost from the very beginning. I think the moment of reset for us was not about deciding that we want to focus intently more on relationships, because I think that's part of our history. It was deciding that we are going to become an academically excellent institution, that we are going to be known for very high quality scholarship, and our academic programs are going to be highly ranked, and Elon's academic program is going to be well thought of across the United States, that we're going to hold the major accreditations for our professional schools, like our business school has AACSB accreditation. It didn't always. That came during the time that I was president of the institution. The conversation was, how do you become academically excellent and not forget about your students and not forget about these relationships that have been so important to us for over 100 years. So I think we probably came at it in the other direction. We had a very important conversation early in my tenure as president with the faculty. And we still have a tradition at Elon, even though we're an institution with about 450 faculty, and we're not a small, tiny little college anymore. We still have an all-university faculty meeting once a month. And early in my tenure, for about 2 years, as academics tend to do, these conversations can go on for a long time. We had a serious dialogue about what is the nature of faculty work at Elon. What are we doing here? What do we reward? What do we value? And we came up with a document. It's not terribly long, but it guides our thinking in very important ways. And it's called the Elon Teacher, Scholar, Mentor Model. And the word teacher came first because we wanted to signal that teaching, our long-held highest priority, was still our highest priority. Then scholarship. Elon was making a commitment, a big commitment, to encourage faculty work and scholarship, which is something that had not always been valued at the institution. And that was a big cultural change for us. But significantly, the word mentor was also included. We decided that we wanted to be the institution that was the example of how to intentionally blur that boundary between teaching and scholarship. How can we encourage faculty to invite their students into their research? And how can we help faculty look for inspiration and inspiration and ideas for their scholarship over the course of the work that they do while they're teaching their students? So I think that was the big conversation for us. And like all things, I'll finish up by saying this doesn't happen overnight. I was president here for almost 20 years, and unless somebody drops billions of dollars on your institution, it's very hard to make progress on any of these initiatives simply overnight. You have to be patient. You have to set long-term goals. It's like steering a ship. You have to have horizon points that are many years out, and know that you're going to continually make progress towards that goal, make continued investments in programs like honors that are going to get you towards those long-term goals. This is not fast work. This is slow, culture-changing work, and you have to put the money up. This is not just about saying words. This is about making financial investments in the right programs that are going to move you forward.
Yes, thank you very much. So just a clarification, when you talk about faculty, you mean all teachers involved, because faculty can be understood differently in different cultures. And when you mean scholarship, you mean the scholarship in research, for instance, in energy, but also the scholarship in teaching. Am I correct?
Yes. Yes, you are, on both counts.
Okay, thank you. So you say also put the money in the right programs. So that's about probably mentoring or honors or undergraduate research, or do you have special target programs that you would advocate?
Well, first of all, we put a lot of money in hiring many more faculty. We decided that we wanted to fairly dramatically reduce our class sizes here and what we call in the United States the student-teacher ratio. I don't know if you use the same concept over there, but when I first came to Elon, the student-faculty ratio was 19-1. And we lowered that to 13-1, which means that we hired, even as the student body grew fairly considerably during my time, we still lowered that ratio significantly by investing very heavily in hiring more faculty. And this was critical because we had just approved this teacher, scholar, mentor statement. I think we had a pretty good idea of the kind of faculty member that we wanted to hire, somebody that was committed to teaching, somebody that was an active scholar, somebody that enjoyed working with students and spending time with students outside the classroom. And we were able to hire literally a couple of hundred young scholars to join our ranks and help us create that culture. By and large, that was by far the biggest investment we made, was in the faculty, to hire more faculty. And these folks are now mid-career. Some of them are even approaching later career, and they've made an enormous impact on shaping the institution. We also made a big commitment to faculty development. John Zubizarreta was speaking about this in the video. We hired Peter Felten, one of the best faculty development people in the world, to come to Elon and open a Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning. People don't come to the professoriate prepared to be great teachers or to be thinking about these questions of teaching and learning. Elon's a community that has invested very heavily in this dialogue and providing supports for faculty to give them time and resources to do the work. And Peter could talk about faculty development in a bit. The other thing I'd say is, yes, I think we made smart bets on critical programs that we knew would make a big difference in the quality of the student experience. And I've mentioned those 8 high-impact practice areas at the beginning of my introduction. We invested very heavily in study abroad. Today, about 85% of our students do some portion of their undergraduate experience abroad. We invested heavily in civic engagement and encouraging a deep sense of social responsibility in our students. We invested heavily in the residential campus, creating many more residential living and learning communities at the institution. So we knew that our DNA was about a great classroom experience and great experiential learning opportunities, and that's where we put the money.
So there's also now a question. I know it's coming from someone in the Netherlands, and it's from Sylvia, and she is from school in Rotterdam, and she says, how to convince our management to put their money in hiring more teachers? We have about 28 students to one teacher. So yeah, long way to go. Do you have a tip?
Well, I would underscore Peter's point. I think that we both came away from our experience writing the book believing in our heart of hearts that the classroom is the most important place on campus. It's where these relationships, these most important relationships, are seated, it's where you're going to be guaranteed that each semester, each term, students are going to have a set number of significant relationships just simply by virtue of being enrolled in classes. And how we make that the best experience for students possible is the most important thing that we do as leaders of institutions. It's very easy to get distracted from that. I mean, in the United States, we pay a lot of attention to American football on college campuses, and we some schools spend, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars a year on athletics, and it's very easy for other priorities to take over, other administrative priorities. But when you get back to the core of why we're here, it's about relationships and the classroom. That is the heart of the enterprise. And it's simple to say, but hard to do, I guess you might summarize as saying. But just, I think trying from the grassroots to reinforce that mantra is really important. Our book, I think one of the messages of our book is that faculty can't wait for deans and provosts and professors necessarily to provide all these resources all at one time, or to change the culture with the wave of a magic wand that seldom happens. So many of the best practices that we cite in the book are faculty-led practices, doing small and simple things to change the culture. So we would underscore the power that faculty already hold to create change in small and significant ways on their own, to get started. And that is probably the way to go, rather than waiting for some mystical event to happen from on high. Peter, would you agree?
I do. I'm not in the Dutch context, so maybe they have mystical events that can happen that will radically change views of management.
Yeah, we have now a lot of money that is shared, thanks to, the government also said that really some changes are needed now after the pandemic. And a lot of institutions do hire a lot of teachers. And then maybe one of the new problems is that it's very difficult to find all those teachers. So yes, we have this little miracle now happening in the Netherlands.
Oh.
And I think that one of the important things you mentioned is that when we do get those new teachers, that we really have to invest strongly in teacher training, so that new people know how to act upon it. And maybe Anna-Marie, I saw you, maybe you want to add something. You can unmute yourself, I think.
Yeah, I can. No, I think it's right what you say, Mark, about the NPO money, what's coming, but it's very difficult to find people, and we also have a lot of education to give that we couldn't give this year. So, but I was triggered about thinking about what kind of people are you selecting to give your students what you want to give, to make your classroom the most important place on campus.
Well, just to jump in here, I think that means, and it's been true at Elon, I think it's true in the United States, that this kind of academic development, this teacher training work and teacher support work is absolutely crucial, because many of us went through education that wasn't particularly relationship rich. We don't have models or examples of what a classroom like this looks like in our head. So we can't just reproduce that. We have to learn about active learning, and we have to learn about things like collaborative testing so we can do this well. So that's one part of it, because I think, to Sylvia's point about how do you convince management, some of what you have to do, and some of what worked at Elon, was showing management, this is what it looks like when this class has 12 students in it rather than 24 students in it. This is what it looks like when it has 20 rather than 40, right? We can give much more feedback on student work. We can, it's not just I'm lecturing to a smaller number of students, because if that's the case, you don't need a smaller number of students, right? And then the other thing that we've seen in the US that is really a very significant challenge around teacher training is helping our colleagues, both staff and faculty, to get to another question here, understand what the role of a mentor is and what kinds of capacities they have and how they can support students. Because very, very few of us were trained to really be good mentors to undergraduates. And, so how do you balance challenge of students with support? Many of my colleagues, and I think because we're trained to be experts, we think when students come to us, our job is to answer their questions. And what a really good mentor does usually isn't answer the question, it asks the question back to the student in a new way and helps the student come to their own answer. But, there's also issues we've talked about well-being. And how do I support a student who's struggling in any number of different ways around their well-being or identity development? Or many of us, we got to where we are because we were successful in school. So how do we support students who are struggling with failure in school, or maybe deciding I don't want to be, I was interviewing some students yesterday, and the common thread in their stories, this diverse group of students, was they all went to university intending to be a doctor, and none of them are going to be. And so how do we help students through that sort of challenge with their expectations of who they are and who they're becoming? And how do we do that? And that's not simple work, and that's not the work we're often trained to do. My last point here, to get to Jennifer's, is our research showed that yes, the classroom is absolutely essential and academic teachers are key, but there are so many people at our institutions who also have really important roles to play. And so we heard over and over from students in our interviews how important people, the office staff are, how important actually workers in the cafeteria and coffee shops are to help students feel like they're seen, that they belong, that they're capable. And so small interactions, as Leo was saying, one of the most powerful interviews we did was with a student He's a Black man who went to Georgetown University, very selective, very elite university in the US. And he went there as a transfer student after 2 years. So he didn't enter with all his other students as an 18-year-old. And he said he didn't find anybody there who he thought was like him. And he used to study on the top floor of the business building late at night. And the man who cleaned the building reminded him of his uncle. And they became really good friends. And this man, who was a janitor in the business building at Georgetown, in many ways acted as a mentor to this student, just supporting him, encouraging him, seeing him day to day and saying, you know, I'm proud of you. I know you can do this. And so this student said the person who was most important in his success at Georgetown wasn't any of his professors. It wasn't an academic advisor or a dean. It was a custodian. And so helping our colleagues and staff recognize how important they can be in students' lives when they're supportive, when they're encouraging, when they're present for them. And then how do we at the institution recognize that too, so that we can see that, you know, the cafeteria worker who's just friendly to everybody, they're doing an amazing job in supporting our students and creating a welcoming environment. And that's really important for the institution.
Thank you very much. You are giving a beautiful example how every encounter is powerful, and how we really have to really see each student each time over and over again. And that it's also about relationships between deans, between teachers, between colleagues, and even also something to mention, also between different disciplines. Because very often we are in our own silos, but we also have to reach out to each other and be very careful to try to understand the language of another discipline, of another human being, and also of other cultures and internationally. We have now also a Dean of Internationalization because we strongly believe that this democratic dialogue could be learned more powerful when you meet people from abroad as well. So Leo and Peter, we are reaching to the end. There's one question from John Zubizarreta that we answered a bit, not really. It's putting honors also in the picture and asking, well, if I would put it more general, what can we do to cultivate positive relationships and make sure that our relationships embody also the idea of sharing your talent and moving the world? Leo, can you elaborate?
Peter, do you want to go first? Let me give that some thought. One thing that's important to do is not to have the honors programs be seen as this elite island space in the university for a privileged small group of people. I mentioned this in the video this morning. I think good honors programs are always reaching out and looking for connections on the campus. They are pioneering in terms of good practices. Not, again, how can we get more students doing this important kind of work? So honors fueled the growth of an undergraduate research program at this institution that involves hundreds of students, most of whom are not members of the honors program. But the honors program played that leading role in helping that effort get started. So I think if you think of yourself as kind of a research and development unit, an experimental unit, a good practices unit that is going to be trying out new things and being very experimental and innovative, I think it's also important for honors programs in avoiding this silo effect of being apart from campus, is to intentionally invite other people to be part of your program. I mean, as the president of the institution, honors was always reaching out to me to come to the annual honors banquet and come to student poster sessions and just kind of relentless invitations to be involved. I think that's really important too. So the programs themselves have to be relationship oriented, I would say, in order to in order to spread the effects of their good work. Peter, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Leo. Two just quick things to add. One thing that our colleague from the video, Maureen Vandermaas-Peeler, has been wonderful about, and with honors, is talking about and encouraging students talking about struggles and failures too. Because I think one of the problems sometimes with the stories we, teachers, administrators tell about students is we tell really heroic stories, of very inspiring, this student was amazing before they got to Elon, and then they did all these amazing things at Elon, and now they're winning a Nobel Prize, and isn't that great? And that's a wonderful story, but many of our students hear that story and say, that's not me. I could never do that. And so how do we tell stories of very successful students who struggled, very successful students who came in expecting to study one thing and then changing and studying something else, right? So what we're doing is we're normalizing that kind of struggle and change and help seeking and relationship-rich experience. So that's part one. Part two, and Leo hinted at this, there's a very senior scholar of higher education in the US named Alexander Aston, and he has a wonderful critique of American higher education that I think is very relevant here. He says, American higher education is far too focused on being smart and not focused enough on becoming smart. And so how do we help our students? How do we help ourselves and our colleagues really focus on this idea that all of us are learning and growing and becoming, rather than simply being really good at things? So honors programs should be places that's partly why we like the Rutgers Newark example of the honors living learning community. These aren't students always who are conventionally smart, the highest test scores and anything. But that program is about saying every student has potential. And so everyone in the honors living learning community is becoming smarter in that program. And that's what honors is about.